About 2 days ago, there was an earthquake in Johannesburg because vast areas of Johannesburg have been hollowed out underneath. So many assumptions, as we should, that the ANC actually knows, has got the answers. And I don't think they have answers as much as we think they have. In 30 years, the budget for land reform has never been above 1%.
Dumelang, Abshen, Botani, Nda, hello. Tobela, Rialocha. We hope you're well wherever you are, wherever you're watching us from. Welcome to our podcast, Umhlaba Talks. This is a podcast that is facilitated by the Land and Accountability Research Center at the University of Cape Town. The Land and Accountability Research Center is a research center that focuses on rural land, traditional governance, and mine hosting communities or mine affected communities. And this podcast is going to be focusing on those issues. We'll be delving deeper into those issues and speaking to experts, rural activists, and rural communities. And I'll be your host as we navigate through those discussions and topics. And I'm not alone. I have a co-host, but this co-host is a ghost. You will not see the co-host. My co-host is Umhlaba, and they are named after the name of the top of the podcast. And as I've said, you will not see this person; you will only hear their voice. And just a bit on Umhlaba, on the name of the podcast, we decided to go with Umhlaba and personify Umhlaba because we want to use the richest understanding of land, and the topics that we're going to be covering are going to be focusing on the broader understanding of land, and especially delving deeper into Isintu notions of land. And Isintu, to use English then, a shorthand in English would be indigenous knowledge, Southern African indigenous systems or vernacular systems of being. But we prefer to go with Isintu. So we want to unearth and bring those notions and ideas to the fore in this discussion. And today is our first episode, and we will be chatting with an amazing, incomparable feminist researcher and analyst, Nomboniso Gasa. Welcome, Nomboniso, to our podcast.
Well, hi.
Hello.
Thank you for having me. I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Thank you. Thank you for honoring us with your time. We are really honored to have you, and also to have you as our first guest. This is everything. And just to remind you, would like you to please kindly follow us, like the episode, and share and subscribe on our YouTube channel. And if you could also please follow on our Twitter page or Twitter feed, that's a language, at LAC UCT, and also on our partner organization's Twitter feed, which is the Alliance for Rural Democracy. So we'll be releasing one episode per week as we delve into these discussions. And
And also, if they can please give us feedback.
of course. Yes, thank you for that reminder, Nombonisa. Yes, we would really appreciate your feedback, and your feedback will be handled by Umhlaba themselves. Your contribution will be coming into the episode or into the podcast through Umhlaba, through the voice of Umhlaba. So to kickstart our episode, we're gonna start with a smallanyana game, just to settle ourselves and break the ice. And that game is handled by Umhlaba themselves.
Yes. Thank you so much for having me today. You know what? I'm so excited that I'm going to be here all the time. Umhlaba Talks. Umhlaba over here. So we're going to start with a trivia question. You guys will win nothing more than just being happy that you actually got these questions correct. There's nothing else.
So we win
to
our
win.
own happiness.
You
Okay.
win, you win your happiness back. Okay. So, I'm gonna start you off. It's just going to be for 1 minute that I'm going to be asking these questions. Both of you can answer, and it's just about how many questions you can answer in a minute. Host, don't look stressed. This is
I'm stressed because
you
I don't know what the
have
question
been
is.
working at the Land and Accountability Research Center for 100 years, so
They
you
expose me.
so you know this, right?
So
Let's
are
go.
we answering at the same time,
I
or
mean,
is it
yeah.
like you get a minute, I get a
No,
minute?
no. Both of you
You jump
collectively.
in.
Yeah, you
Jumping
just
in.
jump in.
So it's a
So
competition.
it's a competition. Are you ready?
Yes, let's
Yes.
go.
Okay, let's go. What was the first legislative intervention that formally dispossessed black South Africans from land?
It was the Natives Land Act of 1930.
I'll give it to you, but hey,
Thank you.
It's the 1913 Natives Land Act, okay? What was the name of the king who founded the Basotho Nation?
I will take a guess again. It was Moshweshwe. It was King Moshweshwe,
Which one?
the first.
Okay.
He founded the nation,
You-
so
you-
he's the
you found-
first.
That was too easy. What was the first major encounter in the Anglo-Zulu War between the British Empire and the Zulu Kingdom?
It was. Is this the War of?
Let me repeat. What was the first major encounter in the Anglo-Zulu War between the British Empire and the Zulu Kingdom? The first major encounter.
Okay, I think you're talking about the War of Isandlwana.
Yes. No. But please give your guest a chance, eh?
No,
Sandra?
let him answer all the questions.
As of 2022, who is the current and fifth democratically elected president of South Africa?
I'm giving
Cyril
you a chance.
Ramaphosa.
Okay. No, you've got that. The time is done. That is so
And
shocking.
I win.
Really?
Yes, that was literally a minute. It flew by.
So
but
how
yeah.
many questions? I was hoping that you were going to have. He's going to get tired, and then I kind of coming.
Okay, let's make it fair. Let me give you 2 questions so that we can.
Okay,
yeah.
it's fine,
We
it's
can't
fine,
win
we're being fair.
everything. Okay. What colorful waterway is the longest river within the borders
Oh,
of
no,
South
I
Africa?
don't
Okay.
Leave it. Which one is it?
So leave it at
Ask
that.
the question again,
Orange
so
River?
just so we don't leave it.
Orange River.
100%.
Okay, we remember that high school geography.
We have to make it easy. Yeah, we have to
All
make
right.
it easy. But yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Mhlaba, for that game,
Yes.
and
And you-
congratulations to me for winning.
You're happy
Yes.
now?
For
I am
holding,
very happy.
for holding the whole thing. Yeah.
I won fair and square.
Yeah, you did. You did.
Let's delve into our discussion. Thank you for that game. So to kickstart the theme or focus of our podcast today, we would like to talk to you about land dispossession, where we are today in terms of land reform or land redress, and what needs to be done. And to kickstart us off, we'll start with a quote that was doing rounds in the social media and media recently in the past 2 weeks or so. By the quote goes: former public protector Thuli Madonsela tackled controversial comments made by political analyst Mwelezi Mbeki on the land debate, in which he said, "There was a war between black and white people, and the whites won the war. They did not steal the land. They conquered it. They did not steal, they conquered the land. The land that whites have in South Africa, they conquered it. If I give you an example, England was conquered in 1066 by a French group called the Normans, and they still own the land in England. They did not steal the land from the English, they conquered it by force of arms." We would like to hear your response to that, because it itself gives a particular narrative of the history of our country and in relation to land dispossession.
That perspective is predominantly from the point of view of the victor. It's the kind of narrative that mainstream white society and mainstream colonial society in general tell themselves about the places they've been, about the people they have conquered, the people they have enslaved, the empires that they have built, and the wealth that they've taken from other countries. It doesn't really matter that Mweletse Mbeki is a black man,
Mm.
but he's certainly positioning his reading of history from the point of view of white people and conquerors. Of course, what is theft? What is land theft? What methodologies are used to steal land? You don't steal land like you steal a cell phone.
Mm.
You know, where you pickpocket somebody's cell phone. He is talking about wars. These were not wars amongst equals. These are not wars of both sides having access to the same weaponry. So in the first place, there was incredibly huge disparities. The first, of course, question that we would have to ask is, what were they doing here in the first place? To be fighting for land, to be conquering land, and if we start from that perspective, that they should not have been here, this was not their land to fight for in the first place.
Yeah.
This was not their land to conquer to begin with. And I think throughout colonial history, we see this. We see Christopher Columbus discovering, and all these things, and so the land was stolen. And there are different ways in which the land was stolen. War certainly was not war of equals. It was not, you can't say all is fair in war. It never was fair. So, we can come up with all sorts of technicalities to explain, but the fact is, when people speak about land as stolen, they are speaking about people taking what did not belong to them, irrespective of the methods that they use, whether they tricked people, whether they made people sign agreements with them, or whether they actually went to war. It was not land that should have belonged to them. Similarly, people argue, people who are sort of, denialist about slavery, about how bad slavery was. They say, well, actually the slave owners did pay something for the slaves. And people always remind us that we shouldn't view slavery from the perspective of today. We should view slavery in the context of that history at that time, and that so it was a transaction. And then they tell us that also with respect to African slaves in particular, that a lot of the focus is on European and Western owners of slaves, and that we do not look at the African chiefs who actually sold people into slavery.
All right. May I interject? So, you've given us a pattern where the narratives of the victors are being imposed on everyone. In fact, they're being forced on the people who are the victims of these historical encounters and events that unfolded. So, to bring it back to the South African context in relation to land dispossession and in relation to this narrative that's being given here by Mweletse Mbeki, what were some of the processes or tools that were used to dispossess people of their land in South Africa? So, let's say, talk to me like you're talking to a primary school kid.
Well, I think there were many things. Firstly, there's the fallacy of land that has been discovered. There's a very famous painting by the Afrikaner painter PNF. And he has this Van Riebeeck painting gazing over this vast territory, and there's nothing. There's just land, there's nobody. You don't see the First Nations, you don't see the Khoi, you don't see the San, you don't see anybody. So the narrative is that it's empty, it's a vast land, it belongs to all of us, it's God's land. So that's the first thing. It starts with that, the notion of discovery. and the notion of discovery erases people who reside there. It erases the fact that this land belongs to somebody.
Mm, mm,
And and there are a whole range of things that are brought into this that well, we can coexist here. I have discovered it, you discovered it first, so we can coexist. There are no papers that say this is your land. So that's the first one, kind of, thing. The second one, of course, is the exchanges. And so quite a lot of Europeans who arrived here got stranded in some place or the other at some point. And the natives and the indigenous people would host them,
mm.
give them food, give them place to stay, and all of that, because the understanding is that you help, human beings when you come across them. And of course, in many instances, we know that the Europeans then turned on them and took the land. So there's also that. And again, you'll find a whole lot of arguments about how these people agreed, and so there was that. There was also all sorts of kinds of trickery, where you use shiny things, and all these things are new. So obviously people are fascinated by that. There's also the use of religion, where you introduce the Bible and you make people believe in heaven that comes after death, whilst they have their heaven here and now, which is your land and your property and your wealth. So war, and there were lots of wars, wars of resistance, but there's a nuance that we often forget, that people didn't just see foreigners arriving and then start throwing spears at them. So there was always the notion that we can coexist. Here, not far from where we are, is Kirstenbosch, and the Van Riebeeck hedge is there, and they decided this was their land. And then they built, they planted this hedge to keep away the Khoi, who were, quote unquote, a nuisance on them. Because the Khoi were used to walking with their livestock and everything else that they have. So these people were now planting things, and agriculturalists and settling and introducing settlement. And the Khoi didn't see why they should not, as pastoralists, they shouldn't have their animals there, they shouldn't walk there. So one of the ways in which throughout colonial Africa land has been taken is to start saying this part, marking it out, and it was marked by the Van Riebeeck hedge. It then kept, even today, it still sounds outrageous that you come in people's land and then you plant a hedge to keep them away, because they're a nuisance. They're disturbing your plants and all of this. So there were so many ways in which, as people say, the empire teaches us about heaven after life, whilst they enjoy our heaven that they have taken over as theirs here and now.
Oh wow. Wow. Thank you. Thank you for that. That was amazing. And I mean, you gave us so much. And one of the themes I'm picking up from what you're just giving us now is a theme of erasure.
Mm,
This empty land theory. I remember learning about that in undergrad.
mm,
This idea that there were no people here. And I mean, Sarafina even touches on this, that, when the ship, what was the ship again, arrives, the Huda Hope and the other one, when they arrive, it's like they don't see the people that are there. They don't consider them human. So in addition to, I mean, there's this theme of historical erasure. In the moment of contact, there's an erasure. But then also with the narratives that say that, oh, we conquered you, we never stole your land, it's also another erasure because
It's not our fault. It's not our fault that you were weak,
but then also it
Yeah,
erases the facts of
exactly.
history of what actually happened in history or back then. It's like it's changing the narrative and erasing people's experience. And also that extends to the use of violence because the process of erasure, that's a violent process. And then you violate people and you literally kill them and obliterate them. And then let's say 300 or 400 years later you say, oh no, we just conquered them. So you're erasing that. What happens to
But
that?
also you make sure in that erasure that the conquered, the erased, internalize this. I mean, I was educated in the time of Bantu education. Every day, for people of my age, every day we will remember that in the morning we did the timetable 2 times 2, 4, and then there was a history lesson, and every morning it started with the song, "Who discovered the sea route to India?"
Yo,
Vasco
Gama.
da Gama. Every day, kids sing. It was even before the actual history of dispossession, or was even taught to us. But we were made to internalize the song every morning. So in a way, by the time you really are able to make sense of the facts and all of that, you have been so conditioned to internalize that Vasco da Gama, on his way to India, he discovered the sea route to India. And he may have landed here, but there was nothing wrong with that. So, yeah.
Is it indoctrination of our own erasure? Because you have to be able to understand what's happening. I think in terms of, if you're going to be singing that every single day, where are the black leaders that you're going to learn about? Who are the people that are going to come and save you? I think that's my theme that you're sort of passing off erasure. It makes sense in terms of how I feel conquered, and especially in terms of the discussion about land dispossession. Do you think it was an indoctrination
Of
from when you're
course.
early?
Of course, it was indoctrination. I mean, the entire Bantu education system was about indoctrinating and educating people for only the little bit that they would need to serve white people. It was also, I mean, in many ways, to fully indoctrinate people, to fully erase people, you have to indoctrinate them in some ways. You can't successfully erase somebody who keeps saying, but I'm here.
Yeah.
But I'm here, but I'm here. You to fully indoctrinate, to fully erase somebody, you have to do it in such a way that they themselves do not see themselves in the script that you are writing, but also that they don't see the need to insist that they are present in the script that you're writing. So when you teach kids to sing "Who Discovered the Sea Route to India," they go home. This tune is very catchy. They sing the tune. The kids who have not yet started school, they start singing it. The parents who have not had time to think about history or to get education because they're poor and because they are working hard for their children, they themselves sing it, as almost like just a tune,
Yeah.
And in many ways, so when you do this in a family, when you teach one child to sing this song every morning, it has a ripple effect. She sings it elsewhere.
Yeah.
And that's what erasure is about. To a large extent, accepting that you are erased, that you have no claim to be seen, and this is, I think, to a large extent, this is something that we still carry within ourselves. This is part of the multi-generational trauma that we have, and the trauma that we have in relation to the land, and in many ways the trauma that is deeply embodied in the land.
Let me jump in there. Thank you. Actually, you brought me to a very good point, because earlier you talked about the Jan van Riebeeck hedge, which is used to draw a boundary on the land, and now the original inhabitants of this land are not able to move around, which means actually their freedom is limited now. Physically they don't have the freedom, but then also this is an act on the land. This is violence on the land,
Oh, yeah.
because now you're cutting the land itself. And that obviously changes the relationships that people have with the land. You're introducing new relationships with the land. So attached to that, there's also, especially in this part of the world, actually all over the continent, people bled
Mm,
on this land.
mm,
People were killed on this land, obliterated on this land. In fact, it's been argued that a genocide was conducted against the Khoi and San groups that were here. So I've always been curious about, what has that done to the land?
mm.
All this blood that has been spilled on it since colonialism, through apartheid, and until recently. What has the blood of the indigenous populations that has been spilled on this land done to the land, and how is it affecting us as people who live on this land, who are connected to those people who used to live here before?
W- we have to think of land as living, as dynamic, um, as having a life of its own. In the part of the Eastern Cape where I come from, not far from where I come from, is a whole story about the Boko movement in the 60s, when people were opposed to the formation of Transkei as a Bantustan, and how loads of men uh, left from Langa as part of the Boko movement to go and oppose Matanzima in Transkei. When they got off Queenstown, the station, and these men were dressed in particular ways, so they were easy to identify. So they had blankets over their shoulders, and when they arrived in Queenstown, they found a reception committee of the South African police, and these men were chased into the mountains. Some were killed. There's a whole part near Lady Frey, and there's a whole part of that land where sometimes kids are playing outside and whatever, and then they find bones, which are basically human remains. There's the blood that had been soaked there that nobody even now talks about. Um, Again, near Queenstown is Bullhoek, where a massacre had taken place. In the place where I come from, there's a way in which so the area is called Kusabalele, which is an exclamation mark. And it says like it is dry.
Yeah,
You know,
it still is
it
dry.
is still dry, and because it's a very, very dry area, and there's a way in which that land is unforgiving. It is dry. It is difficult to eke out a living um, from that land. It is desolate, and that's the place that I call home. So in a way, you start seeing the beauty even in the desolation that you see. But the point that I'm saying is that everywhere where there is conflict, and particularly conflict that results in death and dislocation, all that memory, all that record, that historical record, is in the land.
Mm.
As I'm telling you, I'm saying there are, in some of these mountains, Guanonis, those kind of areas, there are sometimes people come across bones, human bones. there's you cannot think of Bulhoek without thinking about the massacre that took place. And I think that in many ways the memory is so heavy for all of us that we prefer, whether we prefer or not, we end up just moving along, moving on, and forgetting this. But it is held deeply in the land, and so what we get to remember is the violence. But the violence does something else to the land as well, which a lot of climate specialists and activists that will talk about, that the land can no longer sustain us.
Mm.
About 2 days ago, there was an earthquake in Johannesburg, because vast areas of Johannesburg have been hollowed out underneath. And so we all have to contend with what has been done on the land, what has been done to us, and how what has been done to us connects with what has been done to the land. And a process of healing is about reconnecting with the land and healing the land. Like in the most physical sense, the place
Yeah.
that I come from again is is desertified because people didn't have means of getting stoves and paraffin to cook for themselves. So the land is completely buggered. So in a way, there also has to be a very deliberate way of giving huge parts of this country's land a rest, so that they can rejuvenate, and we can have new vegetation coming in.
Yeah. I mean, there are so many stories like that are similar to what you just shared right now. I just came across a book by Mbuso Ngozi where he writes about what happened in Bethel, a potato farm in Bumalanga, where prisoners were taken to work on that farm, but then they were killed. And then in the 50s, people's heads will be found, skulls will be found in potato bags, and there was a potato strike. And something similar happened in Tututu in KZN. And I'm sure these are just a few and far in between examples. There's more. So, which really confirms what you're saying, that the land itself is traumatized. And then on top of that, actually, there is a lot of complexity that we have to work through. I mean, even in this conversation right now, there's so much complexity that we're trying to unravel. And now, I mean, as an ordinary person, where do you even begin? And I think, to be honest, this is why the comment by Mwele Mbeki triggered so many responses, because it's far more complex than the narrative he shared. And that narrative is violent itself. So moving on from the history, just acknowledging the fact that actually we stayed on the history so much because it's complex. And those are complexities we can't just overlook. So from your perspective, where are we now in relation to land, in relation to redress and trying to redress all this complex history of stolen land and how the theft was conducted?
I think that 30 years after the first democratic elections, we have achieved very little. I think we are at a process where, that on the one hand, there's the constitutional imperative to redress, to restitute, but also there's the fact that it would appear that politicians are not quite convinced that this is the path that we need to take towards redress, restitution, and redistribution. Because when you take something serious, what you consider a priority and important in your life or in the life of a nation, you make sure that you make provisions for it. The fact that in 30 years, the budget for land reform, for restitution, for redress, for redistribution has never been above 1% is an indication of exactly what those we have elected to do these things and what they think about it. Think about this. In your household, you have competing needs.
Mhm.
You have a finite budget that probably can't cover everything, but you decide what are the priorities
Mm.
and you put resources towards those priorities. And the process of budgeting for a country is exactly the same thing. So if land is as important, if land reform, if redistribution, restitution, and redress are as important as politicians tell us through their political rhetoric and policies and political speeches, and if it's as important as that, surely they would know that it requires more than 1% of the budget.
Mm.
And here's a kicker: in most cases, even that 1% of the budget
Yeah.
is not fully utilized.
Mm.
So you have government departments sending back money because they've not spent it. So this is where we are. We are at a crossroads in this country. We are at a moment of deep crisis. We are asking people who were dispossessed. We are asking people like people in Barberton who, if you go into the area where people were forcibly removed, and you see, you walk just off the town, and you go to the place where those people used to bury their loved ones. There are bones on the surface.
Mm.
You understand? So it's not just about what politicians tell us is important.
Mm.
It's about what they commit to do and how they do it. And from everything that we have seen, either they don't quite understand what to do with this, or they really don't care. But what we do know is that those families whose human remains are really on the surface of the earth are being told to wait for 30 years. They've waited for 30 years. Nothing has happened. And from the way the cabinet is constructed now, I think that they're going to have to wait for another 5 to 10 years.
Mm.
So this is where we are. We are at a place where we really, after 30 years, have got to ask ourselves, what does this mean?
Mm. Mm.
And what it means is that there is no appreciation of how deeply central in our lives land restitution is.
Mm. I could listen to you forever and even forget that I'm supposed to be in conversation with you. But I mean, do you want to come in there, Mhlaba? Do you want to leave you out of this conversation? Do you have any questions or comments?
Yeah, listen, I also could listen to Numboniso the whole day. So one of my questions actually is, well, I have two questions. I understand that you're saying there's only 1% that's being prioritized for land, but they consistently say they have capacity issues. There are agri-seaters which are put in place, or seaters, and then we have an agri-seater that's put in place to have a new generation of agricultural students who might prioritize the agricultural sector. Do you think it's also imperative for us to participate beyond handing over our agency to government and saying, listen, we need you to resolve our issues? We've been taking them to court. We've been sort of being victorious. We have Maledu judgment, Baleni judgment, we have the Ingonyama Trust judgment. So all these judgments have been in favor of Umhlaba. but government is consistently saying, I don't have money, I don't have capacity. Is it up to us as well to also reintroduce new people into the agricultural sector? And we've just voted. Did you vote?
Yeah.
Okay, that's fantastic. So
Getting personal.
I know we have to. No, we have to vote here. So the government of national unity, we have the DA leading the Department of Agriculture, and then we have the PAC leading the Department of Land Reform. I think they've separated now. Your thoughts?
Look, I think that we have to revisit the way we've been doing things.
Yes.
The court, the legal route is important, but it is not everything. I think what we need to do in this moment is to restate the questions of land as political,
Mm.
and insist on them being on the political agenda, and insist on them being seen as part of political priorities. At the moment, South Africans are talking about, South African leaders are talking about having a national dialogue.
Mm.
A lot of the presidential foundations and foundations of eminent people have come together, and they think that we should have a conversation. All South Africans should come together and have a conversation about the direction of our country and what we think should happen. I think that people who work on land reform, on redistribution, on restitution, I think that we need to make a political point and ensure that land is on the agenda, and ensure that whatever is being negotiated and being conversed about in that national dialogue, that it includes land. So many of us, of course, work in specific areas of specialization, on research, on legal issues and all of that. That people don't really want to work on the political space. But the question is, land is not just about history in this country. It is about the politics of this country. It is about the economy of this country. So what do we do now? I think in the first instance, when John Steenhuisen becomes the Minister of Agriculture, we should be saying to him, we need to see how you are going to do agriculture in a way that takes into consideration these kinds of issues. We need to say to the land reform person, PAC, I have never heard this person make any comments on the land issues, particularly for communities that are hosting mines, for communities that where people's graves are being forcibly removed in order to make way for mining and all these kinds of. So we need to say to him, A, what is your understanding of the land question as it stands today? Secondly, we want to share with you what we think is the status of land reform and redistribution in this country. And thirdly, we want to tell you what we think should be happening. And we should own the knowledge that we have very proudly, and we should be loud about it, because it has been crystallized in very important processes that we have had in the last 30 years, especially the Motlanthe high-level panel report. We need to be able to say, whatever else that you're going to be doing in terms of agriculture, we insist that African women in the community that I come from, who were left behind when their husbands were working in the mines as migrant laborers, they were growing food. They were supporting their families, their children, and their communities. So we think that any transformative approach to agriculture needs to look at the wisdoms and knowledge that African women have, So we need to say that after 30 years, we insist that an approach to agriculture that feeds a nation, the fact that we have food poverty in this country, part of it cannot be resolved by large scale farming and commercial farming. Part of it has got to ask these women to be part of the solution and to say, you feed your families. Let's talk about how you do that. So that would be the first thing. The second one is to ensure that um, the land reform process that is taking, that will be seen by the Mr. Nyoso, the new minister, that it is informed by work that has happened before. And the high level panel report led by former President Motlanthe has got very, very clear proposals, and we need to be able to take all of that and put it in a document, in a 3-page document. Say, this is the land agenda in this country. So, Mr. Minister, are you going to look at this agenda? We insist that you look at this agenda, both in terms of agriculture, but also in terms of land reform.
If I may jump in, or did you have a follow-up? Oh, okay. Thank you. Thank you, Mhlaba. Again, complex issues, but I really like the proposals you're coming with. But I must say, I am a bit concerned about this idea of of a national dialogue, because, as you are saying, we've had a similar process in the high-level panel process where people from all over the country actually expressed what needs to be done. So is there really a need to repeat the process? And also, our government is not famous for being very inclusive of the marginalized. Rural women or African women, as you're talking about it, do you think they're going to have a voice in that space, or they're going to need to be spoken for, as they always are?
It's not going to be granted automatically. I'm saying you demand it. You claim your space. You take your space. You basically say there cannot be a conversation about the future of this country that doesn't take into consideration these consequences. And you command that space. You don't wait to be invited. As they are now trying to talk about how this dialogue, they said, there are going to be consultations and so on and so forth. So I think this is a moment where people say, hey, wait a minute. We are not going to be spoken for.
I guess what I'm trying to ask is, through the high level panel process, people actually did that. Say, this is what we want. People's views and voices are actually in Parliament. Parliament has access to that report. So what I'm trying to say is, how do we make sure that what is in there is heard?
Well, you've got to be very careful in this process. The political process and political engagement processes are not like I said this in 2001. And please go and check the thing. We're not going to come back. You say it and say it and say it until somebody listens. So you can't say, well, we said this, but, please check 375, page 375 of the high level. They're not going to do that. So you make yourself, into a compelling presence. And this is the thing that I believe we haven't really done. We've engaged with the parliamentary processes, we've engaged with the legal cases and all of that, but we have not made ourselves a compelling political presence. The ANC would be very, very desperate not to lose the incoming local government elections in 2 years. They would be considering the fact that most of the provinces where they have won elections are rural provinces, are provinces that are covered by Section 25.2, Section 25.6 of the Constitution. So you make sure that the communities that are covered by Section 25.6 of the Constitution tell the ANC very directly that if you do this, you're going to lose local government elections because we won't vote for you. Secondly, you will lose the 2029 elections. And these are the issues. So you come into the discourse as an equal.
I mean, I really I take that and I absolutely agree with you that actually you have to constantly be there and speak for yourself and not have someone speaking on your behalf. For me, that raises another question as to why is our government seemingly not so interested in land redress? Because 30 years after 94, we should not be still having these conversations. We should be talking about something else.
The truth of the matter is that whilst the land question became a rallying call for the liberation movements, with the PAC and the ANC and the Freedom Charter process, there's never really been. I don't think the ANC has really actually worked out all the details and aspects of the land question. The Freedom Charter says the land belongs to all those who live it. There is no document that you will find of the ANC, for example, unpacking that in terms of this is the vision that we have. So it's partly about how history unfolded. So on the one hand, there was this notion of nationalization and that the land belongs to all those who live it. By the time the negotiations come, it's very clear that the nationalization thing has got to be revisited. So I think we are making so many assumptions, as we should, that that the ANC actually knows, has got the answers, and I don't think they have answers as much as we think they have. I can't even talk about the PAC because honestly, I don't understand what their position is beyond the 10-point program.
Thank you. Thank you for that. And I think that brings us to a close in a nice way because you are telling us that we should be speaking for ourselves and we should not be making assumptions that our government knows. And I think that's an interesting point to end, and it tells us that actually we have a lot of work to do. And as audiences, I'm sure you can tell that actually there's a lot of complexity with trying to work through. And we hope as we proceed with the podcast, we'll be able to delve deeper into some of the topics that we touched on today, because we didn't manage to get deep into everything. And I have to say, though, I am personally concerned about the separation of agriculture and land reform. PAC's rallying call since forever has been Izwe Lethu, Africa, Maibuya, and all of that. And so it's interesting that they've been given this portfolio. And then on the other hand, having agriculture under DA is also concerning because DA has been representing agribusiness. Their voice and their constituency is really in that space. And yet this is the same land, because when we're talking about expropriation of land without compensation, it was agribusiness or farmers that were really concerned about that because they worried that that's a land that's going to be taken back. So I'm interested to see how the two are going to be working together or how it's going to play out, because I am concerned about that separation and curious about what it will mean in reality. So to spotlight if activist or any work that we think is worth mentioning. We have some stuff that we'd like to spotlight, but we'll start with our guest, Nomboniso. Is there anyone or any work that we'd like to spotlight?
Yes, I mean, we've spoken a lot about activists and movements that have been engaged in the struggle um, in the last 30 years. And I would like to take this opportunity to pay tribute to two women who have been really at the forefront of that struggle. Women who were part of the anti-apartheid struggle and didn't rest afterwards and simply continued. And one of them is Sizani Ngubane, who unfortunately died in the era of COVID. And the other one is Connie Mohale, who died on Christmas Eve last year. I think it's important that we honor them. It's important that we talk about them. It's important that we encourage each other to remember them and to learn from their sacrifices. Connie grew up in the anti-forced removals movement, and like so many of us of that generation, her teenage years were spent in that movement. And after 1994, she simply continued what she had left. Mam Sizani had survived the Inkatha violence in KZN, and in post 1994, she also didn't say, well, I did all of that and now is the time for me to rest. I think it's important to remember people who have been leading this struggle. I think it's important to remember activists right now who many run away from their own homes and have to go into hiding, because this struggle for land is violent. The struggle for land, it does cost lives, because in many situations people have to stand against powerful interests like mining, like big agricultural business and all that. I think it's important to remember women, because as Adrian Rich says, that every generation of feminists is being treated as if it is the first generation, because there's a discontinuity and the disconnect between the young generation and the ones who have gone before. In the land struggle, we have a very, very rich history. And I would like particularly to encourage viewers to learn about women who have been part of this struggle, and to thank them and their families for the sacrifices they've made.
Thank you very much for that acknowledgement and tribute, which we also share because Mamu Sizani and Sis Connie or Aus Connie were our partners in the work. And actually, if I may, I would like to also add another name that I feel is very important, especially in the context of the current land dispossessions that are taking place in the rural areas. Nonhle Mbutuma from Xolobeni. She's been at the forefront of the struggle of resisting land dispossession in Xolobeni for plus minus 20 years or over 20 years, I'm sure. And in that part of the country, there's also a lot, as anywhere in the country, but Bondoland has particularly a long history of resisting land dispossession, you know, stretching all the way back to the 1950s when the Bantustan authorities system was introduced. So, and I think it's also important to acknowledge her in addition to Auskoni and Mam Susan, because we tend to acknowledge and recognize activists after they have passed away. It's important that we recognize people who are doing the work while they are living, and because they are taking time away from their families and they are risking their lives doing this work. So in those words, I would like to acknowledge Nonhle Mbutuma in addition to the other two. And also, I would like to spotlight this book of poems. This is a book by Dr. Uhuru Poshia Palafala. This book is important because Uhuru offers an account that starts with the death of a grandfather who used to be a mine worker. But through this account, she delves into what mining has done to black people in South Africa, what it has meant. You know, women have lost their husband to the mines, and children have lost their fathers to the mines. And in fact, in one of the poems, she talks about how the mining industry has turned black women's wombs into factories that produce these young men that go to the mines and work and make the capitalist rich. And yet the women back at home, they only wait to receive corpses or people who come back sick. So there is no benefit for the Black people in the mining industry, especially in the rural areas. All they do, they just keep producing this labor that sends that does not add value at home because of the way racial capitalism is set up. It's extractive. So it's really literally extracting from the wombs of Black women.
Mm.
And so this is why I think this book is very important, and especially in relation to what you were saying about Joburg being hollowed below, and we're seeing these explosions that are happening. So the violence of mining, the violence to the land is continuing in so many ways that even while you are on top of the soil and trying to, make a living, you are still in danger of the violence that has been perpetuated to the land for centuries. So with that, we are closing our episode and would like to remind you to please like, share, and subscribe on our YouTube channel. And please comment. And also would encourage positive comments because this is a conversation that we are holding for everyone. And we're not looking to spend time trying to address negative comments that are not productive. We want a productive engagement that will help us get somewhere. So otherwise, negative comments or problematic comments will be ignored or deleted. Also, please follow us on our Twitter feed at LUCUCity and our partners' Twitter feed, which is the Alliance for Rural Democracy. So in closing, we would like to thank our amazing guests for your presence, for your energy, for your time, and for all the information that you shared with us. Thank you very much. We are honored, and we're looking forward to continue learning from you. Yes.
Thank you so much for having me. And I look forward to the interactions with the podcast when it's up.
Thank you. Shaba, do you
No, I
want
don't
to say
have,
something?
no, I don't have anything to say, but I wanted to say congratulations to the host. Thank you so much to the guest for joining us. This is our first episode. We went teke as much as we thought. It wasn't wishy, but we had such a good time. And thank you so much for coming. We really appreciate the knowledge that you shared with us. And it was fun.